Good morning to the greatest group of people in Mississippi. It is a joy to see all of you here today. I want to make a theme throughout the book of Deuteronomy is God's intense desire for relationship. You see, Deuteronomy gives context to all those rules. God said you can eat this kind of fish, but you can't eat that kind of fish. And when you go to cleanse yourself and purify yourself from uncleanness, you got to wash in this particular way. And all those seemingly mundane and difficult and stressful little details of the old law are brought into clarity if you understand how to read the book of Deuteronomy. So when we think about this morning's text, and we're going to be looking primarily, I know the reading was from chapter 15 because it kind of repeated a main theme of chapter 14. But we're going to be primarily in Deuteronomy chapter 14, if you'll turn over there with me. Now, one of the things that I really think is a hindrance and has been destructive in the church today is when people have hidden agendas. You know, there have been many, many congregations that have divided or had great problems because somebody, either a shepherd or maybe a Bible class teacher, and all too often the preacher has a hidden agenda, has somewhere they'd like to take a congregation, but they don't want to tell anybody because they want to just kind of sneak it in or just ease people into that. Well, I want to tell y'all, and I think you've probably figured this out in the last 4+ years, is that I have an agenda, but it's not a hidden agenda. My agenda, and what I hope to be the purpose of my life as I preach and try to instruct and help you to grow, is that you will look at everything in Scripture, in this Bible that we sang this morning. Give me the Bible when my heart is broken. That when life is hard, when things are difficult, when the road is tough, and when you go through the motions of your religion, when you get up and get ready and you come to church and you feed the hungry and you go and work for the Lord and you try to evangelize your neighbor, that all of that stuff is not just routine and it's not just ritual, cold ritual, but you see everything through the lens of relationship with God. That you begin to understand, and some of that we know kind of intellectually, but some of that, even for me, it's been a journey of reprogramming, of having to go through, and I was taught all the right things as I grew up in the church, but I wasn't always taught the why, just the how and the what. But why do I need to go to church? Why do I need to evangelize the world? Why does God ask these things of me? Why? And I'll tell you unashamedly that has been and will continue to be my agenda to help you to have a true relationship, even a friendship with God. For Him to be able to give you what you need to fulfill you, but for you to give Him that which fulfills Him, which is the reason that He created you. And that's why I love being in Deuteronomy. Because besides the words of Jesus, nowhere else in Scripture is this made more clear. Because when we looked at chapter 8, and we discussed that last week, and chapter 10, where He said, why did I allow you to wander in the wilderness these 40 years, in the wilderness of life, through its hardships and difficulties and troubles, on the way to the promised land? You got to pass through the wilderness to get to the promised land. Why are we even here? What's the meaning of life? To test you, to know what is in your heart, whether you would keep His commandments or not. And then chapter 10, but what does the Lord require you but to love the Lord? Chapter 6, that we repeat often from Jesus's repeating of it when asked what's the greatest commandment. For thou shalt love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and you shall teach your children everywhere you go to love the Lord that way. That's what this book's about. And that's what chapter 15 is about, and chapter 14. And it's intriguing because this chapter, Deuteronomy 14, has all the trappings of what we've read in Leviticus and Numbers. It looks exactly like, in many ways, the rest of that Old Testament law, with all of these and the thous and the do's and the don'ts. And indeed, it has some very stringent commandments, but when you read it through the right lens, and when you see what's going on in this passage, I hope you'll see what, I wasn't feeling very good this week, so I had a lot of time to reflect and think and study on this. And it just came off the page to me, filled my heart, because of the awesome God we serve and how much he loves me and how undeserving of that love I and you are. So in chapter 14 and 15, they're intriguing because they blend this relational desire of our God with the rigid commandments of the old law, and they show us what I think is a clear and lovely connection. So we start in chapter 14, and we read verses 1 and 2. And it says, "You are the children of the Lord your God. You shall not cut yourselves, nor shave the front of your head for the dead. For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. And the Lord has chosen you to be a people to himself, a special treasure above all the peoples who are on the face of the earth." I want us to focus, and I looked it up in like 7 different translations. And I was grateful that my Bible, the New King James Version, I think had the very most beautiful description of all. When it said these words, "He has chosen you a people for himself." Listen to these words. "A special treasure above all the peoples who are on the face of the earth." God's children are treasured by him. You see, that's not just a word that we would use in casual conversation. We don't use the word treasured like, "Oh yeah, I like to play golf." We might even say, "I love to play golf," or "I like to fish," or "I love to fish." Or some of you might even say, "I like Mississippi State," or "I love Ole Miss," or whatever it may be. But we generally don't use this word. This word is kind of above and beyond. This word communicates that which is our heart's fondest of desires. What is your treasure? See, when we talk about treasuring things, this fills my heart with joy today because I know that my boy and his sweet wife, they're going to have someone to treasure today. Everybody who's had kids, you remember that day, right? Or those days if you have multiple children. When you held that baby for the first time. And Lenore and I always laugh because I used to tease with her before we had kids. I said, "Everybody says every baby's the most beautiful thing ever, but all babies aren't the most beautiful thing ever." And I know that because we had Seth, 3 kids later, and he was ugly when he was first born. I mean, he was like 2 weeks late. He was 10 pounds, 2 ounces. He looked like that Benjamin Button movie, born backwards, born old. But I teased with her about, our babies aren't pretty. I'm going to say, well, they're precious, but I'm not going to say, but then when I held Rianne in my hands for the first time, I just cried tears. And I said, I just went on and on. "Lenora, she's so beautiful. She's so beautiful." Because you see, I treasured her. Now, I think this is important for us to note because when I was growing up, I knew that God loved me. We use that word a lot. And God, in his very nature, his essence is love. But I don't know that it ever crossed my mind. And I know that at least in how I felt about my relationship with God, I did not consider the fact that I could be the treasure of the creator of the universe, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Because I should have. I should have gotten that memo since he calls me his son and he is called my father like 4,000 times. I should have gotten that memo. But you see, I'm more related to God as a judge and myself as someone accused. I'm more related to God as a king, and he is king and he is a judge. And myself as just a subject, a pawn. myself as a treasure. See, just that word is so powerful, and I'm so grateful the Holy Spirit chose to use it. What do we even use this type of language for? Consider the magnitude of it. There aren't many things in my life that I would call my treasure. How about you? In fact, I don't think I'd call any physical thing my treasure. My wife, my kids, my grandkids. You? Those are treasures, but they're beyond just the valuable. They become, a treasure is not that which is valuable. A treasure is that which is priceless. That is so worthwhile that you can't even put a value to it. You see, when we feel this way about anyone, our hearts only have one desire. And you know you have this desire. When that lady walked down the aisle and you saw her for the first time in her wedding dress, you treasured her. And you wanted her to treasure you in return. When you held that baby in your arms for the first time, you had no thought in the world except this is going to be my child all the years of my life. You're going to treasure them. And you had the expectation and the deep desire to be treasured in return. But you see, what the devil's really primary tactic is to get us to misplace that which we treasure. Isn't it? That's all he has to do to pull us away from the Lord. It is get us to treasure things that don't have the same value. Treasure material things, or treasure money, or treasure career, or treasure even people and friendships over God. I like to read, and I've read some of the classics, and of course probably most of us have either read or seen the movies by J.R.R. Tolkien. His most famous, of course, is The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And in the story of The Lord of the Rings, it's this epic, grand scene of a conflict between good and evil. But the central focus is the One Ring. And if you've seen the movie or read the books, you know that the One Ring is at the center of everything. Because that One Ring, its most nefarious power, now it can make a person invisible, and indeed it's got the power to bind together all the other rings and all of that. But its most nefarious power is it causes whoever holds it to obsess on it. And when they obsess on it, it kind of comes out in everything they do. They'll sacrifice everything for it. It'll transform them. You see, Gollum, he's kind of the archetype of this in the books and in the movie. Gollum takes this ring and it turns him into this hideous creature, and he'll do anything to keep it. Even so much that at the end of the story, he reaches and he grabs it and he falls into the fires of Mount Doom, and he's consumed with the ring. He'd rather die and have that ring than to lose it, because he calls it my precious. And even those who are good, Bilbo and Sam and Frodo and all of the good characters, when they have the ring too long, they start to slip out those words, my precious. And Tolkien, he was dearest friends with C.S. Lewis, and they were writing their books at about the same time, and they consult with one another. Tolkien wanted to give a very subtle Christian theme to those books, and he did it through the One Ring. That the devil, all he wants is for us to take our focus on the things that matter, particularly to make God our precious, and to obsess on anything else. And all God desires is he has made you, and he has made me his precious. We are his treasure. We are his obsession. So much so that he came to this earth himself to pay the price, the awful price for us. You see, the passion of God and what he desires from us as he treasures us to be treasured in return is seen throughout the entire Bible. I mean, you can talk about the pearl of great price, that parable of Jesus, where he goes through and he talks about when a man finds this pearl, he sells everything he has just to obtain it. It's just precious. It's just treasure. And you see, we are that to God. But the whole concept, everything in the New Testament, when Jesus repeats, what's the greatest commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. And I would argue, and let's turn over there together to the Sermon on the Mount, that probably the best known and longest series of instructions in the New Testament, in the Gospels, the Sermon on the Mount, that this is the recurring theme in the entire sermon. Look at Matthew 5, verse 6. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. What is righteousness? It's to be like God. He said, you'll be blessed if you hunger and you thirst after being like me. We look in chapter 5, verses 10 through 11. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and speak all manner of evil against you, but rejoice, for great is your reward in heaven. He said, I want you to love me so much that you would even endure hardship for me. Because if you don't, then you're just fair weather. That's not real love. You see, you'll endure hardship for your treasure. We look at verse 16 of chapter 5. Let your light shine so before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. I want you to go and be like me and draw people to me. We look at verse 22 in this long series of instructions about murder and about marriage and about adultery and about not taking oaths. And what is all of that stuff, those instructions, really about? Well, it says, but I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without cause shall be in the danger of judgment. Notice the word brother. I can tell you with our kids, I remember so many times Lenora leaning into the back row, just exasperated and brokenhearted and begging them, we love you kids more than anything. Can't you just, at least for me, love each other? Look at chapter 5, verse 48. As he closes out that chapter, therefore, you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. He says, I want you to be like me. We look at chapter 6, verses 3 through 4. But when you do a charitable deed, don't let your left hand know what you're doing. Let your charitable deed be done in secret, and your Father who is in secret will reward you openly. He said, when you don't do good things for other people or for yourself, I want you to do them for me. I want to be your treasure. We look in verse 6. But you, when you pray, go into your room. When you shut the door, pray. He said, don't waste our quality time together squandering it with everybody else. Focus on me. Let me be your treasure. Chapter 6, verse 18. So that you don't appear to men to be fasting, but to your Father who is in the secret place, and the Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. Don't use our relationship, he says, as a means just to gain favor from other people. Make it about me. Let me be your treasure. Chapter 6, verse 20 and 21. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. He says, I want your heart. I want to be your treasure. We go into chapter 7, verse 6. Do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine. He says, don't waste the precious things I've given you. Keep them holy. I want to be your treasure. Verse 7. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. He says, if you just come to me and foster that relationship, I'm here, I'm waiting, I'm listening. Chapter 7, verse 21. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father which art in heaven. He says, I don't want you to be fake, and I don't want you just to be going through the motions. I want you to love me. I want to be your treasure. And there are more. You see, this principle is the why of everything we read in Scripture. That God treasures you. And the reason you were created and the reason you exist is because God desires that you treasure him. Which gives context to the rest of this chapter. Because with that in mind, we move into chapter 14, and we'll go back to verse 1 real quickly when he says, you shall not cut yourselves or shave the front of your head. That's what the pagans did. He said, you don't need to be like them. You're better than them. You're my treasure. And then in verse 3, he says, you shall not eat any detestable thing. And then he goes through this long list of you can eat this, you can't eat that. Why would God do that? Because he just wanted to restrict them and he wanted to make it hard for them to live. No, because they are his treasure. And you know what you have to do when you have a treasure? You take care of it. You polish it. You put it in the right place. You protect it. You see, we need to realize that every commandment God gives us is not so we can't enjoy our life. It's not so we can't live a fulfilled life. It's not so we can't be, people who are living in joy and prosperity. It's so that we can do all those things because God only restricts his treasure in the things that would tarnish his treasure. You see, God, we live in a world today where fornication and adultery and all of the other things that are happening are just rampant. But people don't understand. Is God made sexuality and marriage to be a beautiful thing, and in the right context, he wants us to enjoy those things. But he knows that outside of the confines of a trust and a relationship that someone won't ever leave you because they made a covenant between you and God, that that person is going to love you eternally and forever because they've committed to you. They put it all on the line. God knew that in that context we could have true joy. But in every other context, all we would have is insecurity. And the treasure would be tarnished. Exodus 33, 2-3. And he said, the Lord came from Sinai and dawned on them from Seir, and he shone forth from Mount Paran. And he came with 10,000 saints from his right hand, and came from him a fiery law for them. Why? Yes, because he loves his people, and his saints are in his hands. God gives us those laws so that his treasure will not be tarnished. And then we come to a very interesting portion of this text. And I will say, until recent years, I didn't understand this, and all I knew was the things that I had been repeated to me in my life, particularly about the words tithing and giving. But in verse 22 through the end of the chapter, it says tithing principles. And as I was growing up in the church, I knew that we were supposed to give. And the New Testament doesn't attach a number, but it was always attached in the sermons I heard in the Bible classes that it has to be in excess of 10%, because they gave at least 10%. And certainly that's good. I mean, some of the people in this room eat because people are generous. And so we appreciate that. But one of the things that was intriguing about that to me is, what I never was told to me growing up? Is exactly, we typically in the past, we passed trays and you'd put a check in the plate. Or nowadays, you might give online or use a little barcode that comes up on the screen. Or you might just drop a check in the back as you come in. But no one ever explained to me how in the Old Testament they gave that 10%. Nobody ever said, okay, so they went to Jerusalem and they wrote a check on a stone tablet. I don't know how they do that. Or that they gave and literally gave the animals or gave the grain to the temple. No one ever pointed out a verse to me about that. So when I was reading through for probably the 20th time in Deuteronomy, but then you know how you read through and you see things you didn't see before? I came across this and it just blew my mind. But I understand it now because of what I see in the rest of this passage. It says, you shall truly tithe all the increase of your grain that the field produces year by year. But then this statement kind of was strange. I'd never been taught this part. And you shall eat before the Lord your God in the place where he chooses to make his name abide, the tithe of your grain, your new wine and your oil, and the firstborn of your herds and your flocks, that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. So hold on. They're supposed to give the best of what they have, the 10% best. And they're supposed to give it to God. But then he says, then you shall eat it. I'd never heard that before in my life. And then we continue on in the text, and it says, but if the journey is too long for you so that you're not able to carry the tithe, or if the place where the Lord your God chooses to put his name is too far from you when the Lord your God has blessed you. So he says sometimes, if it's supposed to be in Jerusalem and you're up there in Nazareth, that's a long way to take. I mean, what if you're a wealthy man and a tenth is like 100 oxen? What are you going to go on a Louis L'Amour style cattle drive through Egypt, through Israel? No, I mean, he says, so in that case, verse 25, you shall exchange it for money. Take that money in your hand and go to the place that the Lord your God chooses. So he says, if it's too far and if you have too many animals or whatever, or it's going to take wagons to get it there, then sell it and take the money and then go. But then here's this verse. And you shall spend that money for whatever your heart desires. I'm going to repeat it because I just about fell over when I read it. And you shall spend that money for whatever your heart desires. For oxen or sheep? You like steaks or you like lamb chops? For wine or similar drink? For whatever your heart desires. And you shall eat it there before the Lord your God. And you shall rejoice, you and your household. You see, the tithe in the Old Testament was not about God needing their money or needing their flocks or their herds. It was about one thing. God treasured them. And he wanted to have dinner with them. But not just any dinner. A special dinner. And the reason they had to take the best from their herds is because that relationship was supposed to be the best to them. The reason they took their treasured lambs is because nothing but the best on the menu was good enough for God to eat with those he treasured, and that they should want to eat with the one they treasured the most. It's kind of like in our family. Every year at Christmas, we have traditions. Everybody has different traditions, but we will open a few gifts on Christmas Day, on the morning, but most of the time we open most of our gifts on Christmas Eve. And although we'll have a big, turkey dinner and all that on Christmas Day, on Christmas Eve, we call it snack night or hors d'oeuvre night. And I mean, it's not just a little bit of hors d'oeuvres. It is, Lenora will take all the kids to the grocery store and she'll look at me and she'll look, and that means give me your credit card. So I pull out the Visa and I hand it to her, and she'll take all of our kids and they go to the grocery store and they buy shrimp cocktail and they buy crab legs and they buy, every kind of dip that they like, to dip the chips in, and every kind of, and they'll come up with things, and they'll bring up things I never expected. because that's our special family dinner. And she wants every one of them to have, and I want every one of them to have everything they want. Because there's nothing more precious than being together with them. That's my agenda. I want you to be a people who obey God, who keep his commandments, who live right, upright God lives, who evangelize the world. But I want you to do it for the right reason. Because you know he has treasured you. And you've made him your precious, your great treasure. This morning, if there's someone here who has not yet made the Lord your treasure, well, you're behind the game because he's already made you his. He's already paid a great price for you. All you have to do is accept it. That means coming to him. That means taking him the only thing you have to give, which is yourself, dying to yourself, being buried in baptism, and rising to walk in newness of life, being made a child of God. Or maybe there's someone here like me that when you read some of these things in Scripture through new lenses, you realize that it's not just about what we do. It is about what we do, but it's more than just the details. It's about the heart and about the why. If you need to make any change in your life, let us help you. Come right now as we stand in this.